And our third speaker is already approaching the stage. It's Chris Daly, Vice President, Supply Chain, Strategy, Transformation, and Sustainability for PepsiCo, Europe and Sub-Saharan Africa.
Good afternoon, all. So I'd like to talk a little bit today about what PepsiCo is doing in the world of plastics and circularity. As a company that is 75% using plastic as its primary packaging, the realization of a circular economy for plastic is the highest strategic item on PepsiCo's agenda. And yet, as we look at where we are right now, and we look at the progress over the last 3 years, and are quite comfortable with that progress, we recognize that the challenges here, very much like the previous speakers have said, lie very much around the overall value chain. In fact, a lot of what we have done in terms of navigating our portfolio and improving it are great improvements. And yet, with one of the most viable recycling materials within plastics, the PET bottle, PepsiCo today faces a challenge of still having very low recycling rates. Now, the plastic paradox has a number of angles to it. The first one is obviously the fact that plastic itself is so wonderful and has, so many good properties for a food and beverage business like ours. The fact that, it's low cost, it's flexible, it's non-breakable. The fact that it has high barrier properties. These are things on which the PepsiCo business has grown over the last 20 and 30 years. Convenience foods is where we're at, and beverages, and as a result, plastic plays an important role. The fact that it's so good obviously means that it's a problem and that needs to be fixed, and therefore the need for a circular economy on this. The second paradox, however, is something related to the fact that although we're making good progress at driving the agenda, and though we have an outlook that will reduce the virgin plastic use significantly within our business, the overall plastics environment continues to invest, and there's massive growth within capacity of plastics going forward. The very thing that PepsiCo needs going forward is for people to believe that plastic can be controlled. We need to get to an environment where there is indeed circularity. But if the world, or half the world, is betting against us and saying that ultimately we're going to need more plastic capacity going forward, the risk is that not delivering a circular economy on this is going to be a huge issue for us. And finally, specifically in relation to beverages, where with a really viable recycling program, which is the PET bottle, not being able to get that to a point where more than one bottle in 10 globally can actually turn itself back into a beverage bottle is a huge issue. There are systems in place, there's infrastructure in place, and yet there's huge leakage across that system. Now, the vision of PepsiCo is to have a world where plastics never need to become waste. So the PepsiCo portfolio is really made up of two primary packaging items. The PET bottle, which is our beverage container of choice. 75% of our beverages are sold in that package. And then secondly, as many of you will know, PepsiCo's largest business is actually our snack food business, and in that snack food business we use the flexible packaging that Dana was talking about. Now, those are very different. The PET system, very economically viable. We should see a solution on that one, yet we don't. For flexibles, as Dana's just talked about, it's a very challenging area, and therefore we're working with the C-Flex consortium in order to get an agenda for flexible packaging. Within our portfolio today, 87% of what we produce by weight is actually recyclable. So, a good number overall. We can get that to 95% with known existing technologies, and we have an accelerated plan to do that over the coming years. By 2025, our commitment is to get to a point where 100% of what we put into the market is recyclable, compostable, or biodegradable. 5% of that portfolio is made up of our snacks packaging, and that snacks packaging is the problem that we need to solve going forward. In order to get to full circularity, it clearly means then that we need to work on the entire system and the value chain, as Gian talked about earlier and Dana referenced as well. And that value chain is ultimately where we need to be putting our efforts. If you look at the three things that need to happen, we need obviously for our product design to be perfect. So not only does it become recyclable, but it actually becomes efficiently recyclable. Secondly, we need for consumers to want to recycle and to actually do recycle. And thirdly, then, we need a collection system and a recycling system in order to make that work. The reality is the very first one of those, us putting product into the market that is well designed for recyclability, seems to be the easiest component of that. We have no doubt with our current agenda that that will be delivered over the coming years, quickly over the coming years. What we are also sure of is that the existing systems within markets where there is no deposit on bottles is a disadvantage. And the only way to address the leakage that we currently have in the value chain is for us to promote the use of deposit return schemes. We're seeing across many geographies that these deposit return schemes are being proposed and being put in place. And we believe that when they come in place, there will be a 50% increase versus current recycling rates. That will be much more impactful than the programs we've been running over the years to try to encourage consumers to recycle more. So therefore, PepsiCo is saying we need those DRS systems to be put in place. The advantage of those DRS systems is when they are in place, the quality of the recycled material that comes back is much better, and therefore also the efficiency of the recycling and the rate of recycling and the conversion rate through that process is significantly better. With that, you end up with a higher return on investment and therefore potentially the ability to drive greater investment in PET recycling, and particularly in food-grade recycling. Now, a circular future obviously has benefits that we all know about, but if we think about specifically what we need to do in this space, the DRS system is really at the heart of what's going to change everything. Today, recyclability is a problem. We'll address the problems with the packaging that currently isn't recyclable, and we'll fix that. But we need to address the consumer recyclability piece too. With DRS, the motivation is clearly there for consumers to go after that and to want to recycle more than they do today when they already know that recycling is important, and that will help. But importantly also, as we go forward and as we start closing the loop on packaging that's going into the market and becoming waste, the credibility of the overall system and people's belief in plastic as a way forward will increase as well. Clearly, the longer-term vision for our company is that we use plastic that is made from non-fossil fuel materials, and we are investing actively in that space in order to drive that forward. The challenges that we've seen before and up to this point in time are primarily around recyclability, which I've said we can fix the internal pieces, and clearly DRS systems, as we promote them into markets, will improve the recyclability rate across markets. Typically, recycling in Europe is about 65% on PET bottles. DRS markets typically have a rate of around 90 to 95%. Therefore, it's a huge increase. Secondly, with the DRS systems in place, the control over the PET bottles going back into the system and becoming fully circular, as opposed to finding their way into fleeces and carpets and other type of things, will also improve. So you'll have higher recycling rates, you'll have higher throughput to recycling systems, and you'll have less leakage into other recycled materials. And then finally, consumer participation will be driven by the fact that DRS works. Now, if you look at how we're managing the agenda internally, we break it down into three components of reduce, recycle, and reinvent. If you look at what we're doing on reduction, we have 4 programs that we're running across the business currently. Within our snack food business, where today flexible packaging is a challenge for recycling, our focus is immediately on reducing the amount of packaging we use in each of our packages. When you put chips or snacks into a package, they don't settle immediately. Therefore, the bag is always much bigger than they need to be when you look at what is on shelf. The products settle as they travel through the transportation system. By getting those products to settle sooner, we'll be able to reduce the packaging of each of those bags going forward, and we have pilots across our businesses in North America and Europe as we speak. In addition to that, we're lightweighting all of our beverage bottles. We've done this a number of times over the years, and over the last 30 years, we've taken about 30% of the weight out of our beverage bottles. We will continue to do that, and our program to do that is 2 things. One, it's clearly lightweighting out to reduce less plastic, but it's also to end up with a better bottle design for recyclability going forward to increase throughput through the recycling systems. The third piece that we're working on is across the rest of our non-beverage and non-snack food portfolio, we're tackling the products individually to take plastic out of every single one of them. So across our dairy business in Russia and across our other businesses in Europe, juice and nutrition categories, we have an agenda to reduce the plastic that's currently in those packagings and therefore reduce the weight further. And then on top of that, we are basically going after our portfolio and looking at different portfolio choices that we can make in order to further reduce the plastic. Within the business, over the last 2 years, we've rolled out what we call sustainable from the start. It means there are now red lines on every single package that goes into the market. So therefore, what we're putting into the market from this point forward needs to meet a certain criteria to fit our recyclability criteria. This is important not only for the new products going to the market, but now we're starting to roll this out on our existing portfolio and catching up in the conversion process. On recycle, there are 2 elements to this. One is increasing recycling rates. As I mentioned to you, DRS will drive that forward in a much faster way than we've been able through consumer encouragement. But secondly, the recycled content. Our commitment as part of the European Single Plastic Tax is to increase our recyclable content to 45% between now and 2025. Last week, we announced that we will, across our global business, reduce our virgin plastic use by 2025 by a total of 35%. This will primarily be driven by the fact that we will use increased recycling content. Our glide path currently to get us to that 45% is exactly where we need to be, so we're feeling very confident about that. But the challenge on getting recycled PET material remains a big one, and we would be moving much faster was the availability in the market there for us to be able to buy more recycled content. Food-grade recycled plastic is underinvested in, and this is an area that greater transparency across the value chain will help us to drive going forward. The second thing on recycling is all the things that we will do then to further increase the recyclability of the products that we actually have. So I've mentioned what those actually are. We will continue to invest, of course, in educating the consumer. We'll increase the spend that we're putting against that by 50 million this year, and we will continue that going forward as we wait for DRS systems to come in across the market. Reinvent is probably the most interesting space of all, because typically we've been focused on resetting our packaging so that it becomes RCB compliant and therefore can be recycled through the system or otherwise compostable or biodegradable. We've moved now very much our thinking to the fact that that's really just what we need to be doing on a day-to-day basis, and that becomes the bread and butter of how we operate. But taking this further, we need to then grow the value chain to be in a better place. DRS will help us to do that, and continued investment in extended producer responsibility schemes is something we would also sign up to. But actually, if we look to changing the way we do business, our investment in SodaStream and our expansion plans for that business over the next 5 years will take 67 billion bottles out of the marketplace just by expanding that business. In addition to that, our hydration units where consumers can take their own bottle and get a customized water offering from one of our stations is a model which we will also expand going forward. Within the innovation space, we don't limit it only, of course, to the consumer proposition and how we want to do business, but we will also talk about partnerships and distribution agreements as well. And our participation in the Loop system, which Jian mentioned and which Tom will talk about later, is something else that we're particularly proud of. Not so much because we believe that's the only model, but it's a model that we can absolutely learn from, and it has huge potential to change the way consumers think. And our ability to be part of that is something that we find particularly relevant for this space. Within the materials piece, we're working in a number of areas. So flexible packaging, we've clearly aligned to the C-Flex agenda. We see that very much as the way to go forward. At the same time, because that agenda is difficult and because the scale-up is challenging, we'll also look at waste to fuel solutions, recognizing that obviously we need to offset those with greenhouse reduction programs to offset the impact of those. But clearly trying to find ways of getting alternatives to taking flexible packaging out of the market is part of our agenda as well. Other elements within this space in terms of what we're doing going forward is around what we're doing with our overall packaging agenda. Today, our view of the world is very much driven behind two pieces of packaging, the PET bottle and the flexible package. Our teams are exploring different solutions for the business going forward that extend to beyond the bottle solutions like the soda stream and like the hydration centers, but also looking at different models for how the business will operate going forward, and more of that to come in due course. I think everybody so far has talked about collaboration and partnership, and at the end of the day, PepsiCo is kind of partner to most of the organizations that are currently working this space. This collaboration is massively important for us, and indeed, the amount of information we learn from this, as well as what we bring back to it, is very good. Collaboration, however, across the value chain at this stage is a challenge for the business in terms of where we need to be. We are clearly working with value chain partners, both in the chemical industries as well as in the recycling industries, to try to improve the levels of recyclability of products. But this is the challenge that PepsiCo now steps into, addressing the fact that our value chain collaboration needs to be much more than it currently is. When everybody sits around the table and everybody comes with the right intent to do things, you get great progress. But actually, when it comes to making decisions, there are always profit pools that need to be protected. And ultimately, those profit pools are going to limit the pace of growth. They won't prevent growth, absolutely, but they will limit the pace of growth. As we step into it, getting deeper into those partnerships and working out how we evolve to getting to partnerships that really can make a substantial difference is what we intend to do as the next step of our journey. Governments can play a role here, it's clear. I think, if we look in Europe at the Single-Use Plastics Initiative, there's no question in our mind that that is an absolutely terrific initiative that has driven an awful lot of the potential for us to get to a circular economy. We fully support what that initiative brings, and we look for more of that going forward so that government can play a role in making the value chain more transparent, in making sure that the elements of the value chain are all held account to investing in their piece. And as providers of new solutions come to market and quite rightly demand a return on those solutions, we need to make sure that there's a space for that to actually happen going forward. PepsiCo will invest in the value chain going forward and put a lot of its effort behind there in order to move forward. Within that, DRS is clearly a key element of going forward. Our continued investment on the ERP systems, our EPR systems going forward, and additional to that, of course, collaboration with the many scientific networks and improvements, some of which have been presented today, is something that will help us to move going forward. It's hard not to be confident about the fact that this will change. What I think is frustrating is the fact that it takes a long time for that change to happen. DRS systems in Europe, are expanding across markets, and many markets now have suggestions or recommendations to move to those systems, but most of them won't land until 2022, 2023, because at the end of the day, they're reasonably complex to actually go and do. The fact that it takes that time obviously slows down the potential progress that we can make, and therefore we've got to find solutions in the interim that can sort of help us to move forward. What is clear, however, is that, across Europe, we have the best possible opportunity of creating a circular economy for beverage bottles, and clearly with the C-Flex initiative, as well as trying to find alternative options for that, we're very hopeful that snacks packaging will also be resolved in that space. Thank you.